I'd like to call the meeting to order. The Board of Leavenworth County Commissioners. I'd like to invite everyone to stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to begin with a moment of silence, please. Roll call, begin with Commissioner Culberson.
Here.
Commissioner Smith is present. Commissioner Shimke.
Here.
And Commissioner Stevens.
Here.
And Commissioner Cause.
Here.
All commissioners are present. Public comment. We have Chief Smith. Are you going to speak in public comment?
Yes.
Okay. You can come forward and state your name and title, I believe. Sorry to hear about your mother there a few weeks ago.
Thank you. My name is Tim Smith. I'm Chief with the Tonganoxie Township Fire Department. I'd like to start off this morning by saying thank you to the Commissioners for the opportunity to speak today on the matter of adopting Resolution 2020-39. I'd first like to clarify that I'm not here to represent any organization or special interest group. I am here as the Chief of the Fire Department and to voice my concerns about this resolution. If my understanding of the situation leading up to the committee being formed to review the possibility of adopting building codes is correct, it is that there were some insurance companies or some contractors that came into the area after the Linwood tornado that were accustomed to having to do their work up to building codes standards. Some of the insurance companies were reluctant to pay for those repairs to homes because of the fact that the county did not have codes established. While I applaud the efforts of this commission to correct this matter, I feel that the adoption of this resolution falls short of that effort. Why the 2006 codes? Why would you not start out at a higher code? There have been several changes to the codes and updates in the years since 2006. It makes more sense to at least start at the 2012 code for the initial starting point and then move forward in the future. Did the committee that worked on this check with the other surrounding communities to find out what codes they were working with? The city of Leavenworth is a 2018. Tonganoxie is using 2012. Baser is at the 2003, and Lansing is using 2016 codes. Would it not make more sense to adopt codes that are more in line with these communities that we surround out in the county? With the exception of Baser, where everybody is at 2012 or newer. So to me, it makes more sense to adopt codes that are more in line with those communities. Also, by amending the codes to remove section R103.1.3, which calls for the creation of an enforcement agency, and removal of subsequent sections requiring inspections, along with issuing of occupancy permits, you would essentially be making rules that you have no intention of enforcing. That to me is like trying to raise a child to know the difference between right and wrong, but yet there are no consequences for wrongdoing. Why adopt codes if you're not going to enforce them? What are the legal ramifications to the county in the future if there were to be a mass incident that could have been prevented if the codes had been enforced? While I, like so many others, think that there are too many rules and regulations that govern our lives, and this is a case where I would say that the standards of life safety outweigh those feelings. This resolution is only for adoption of residential code for 1 and 2 family dwellings. What about codes that would apply to the commercial side as well? At the present time, there have been several conference and event centers built in the county. Most of these fall short of the international building codes. As an example, all commercial buildings over 5,000 square feet are required to have sprinklers. Most of these new centers that have been built do not. I have had one such property owner look me square in the eye and tell me that he chose Leavenworth County for his business because of the lack of codes and enforcement for his facility. It would also seem to me that the residential codes would not have applied to the repair of the church that was affected by the tornado, as well as the reconstruction of the greenhouse facility. And I think the insurance company for the church was one of the ones that was balking at doing things to code. These codes wouldn't have changed that need. I would encourage the commission to spend as much time as necessary reviewing this before making a decision. I would also ask that if future committees are formed for review and implementation of future codes, there be a representative from the Leavenworth County Fire Chiefs Association given a seat on the committee. Again, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to present my concerns here today. I am all for the adoption of building codes for the county. Leavenworth County is the sixth largest county in the state of Kansas with a population of almost 82,000. It's time for this to happen.
Okay.
I just feel that this effort falls short.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Smith.
Can I ask you one question?
Yes.
If it was between us adopting what's proposed and nothing happening, what would your decision be?
I feel that if you're, with what you're proposing, the manner in which it's being proposed, it's the same as doing nothing because you're not going to enforce it. You're not creating a division within the county to enforce the codes. So why bother having them if you're not
But
going to enforce
it does create liability if you convey property.
Right.
So in civil court, there would be liability created.
But is the county exposed to that liability too because they didn't enforce it?
So, good question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anybody else on public comment for an agenda item? Then we'll move on to administrative business. Mr. Lawford, any administrative business this time?
I do not have any administrative business. Just an update that there will be on next week's agenda. There will be real property acquisition action item.
Okay. Okay. So, has commissioners had a chance to look at the consent agenda? Is there anything that need to be pulled off and voted on separately on a consent agenda item?
Didn't have a check register, so probably not. So
Yeah.
I'll move to accept the consent agenda as presented. So moved.
Have a motion and second. Any further discussion on the consent agenda? Having none, voting?
Aye.
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 Commissioner Powell votes aye.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And we're ready for the results of the bond sale.
Commissioners, David Arterberry is here to go over our bond sale that occurred yesterday, give you an update and the results.
Good morning, everybody. I've got a morning handouts. If you just want to take one and pass the others around, that'd be great. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here this morning. I think this is the third time I've been in front of you to discuss the bond issue, the latest series of bonds that the county is issuing, backed by the 2016 sales tax that was approved. This issue, the proceeds of this issue are being used to pay off the temporary note that the county issued last year for the project. And we've been taking all the steps, and when I say we, I mean county staff as well as bond counsel. We've been getting prepared over the last few weeks for the sale of the bonds, including as part of that preparation. We went out and got the county's rating reviewed by Standard & Poor's, and one of the handouts that I got there for you was the actual rating report that Standard & Poor's issued. I'd encourage you, if you've got some time, just to kind of look it over and read through it. I think it's pretty interesting to see sort of an objective third party's evaluation of the finances and credit of the county. It was a really good discussion that we had with Standard & Poor's, and they affirmed the county's AA- rating. In my opinion, and given the current, economic environment, simply being able to maintain your rating should be viewed as a positive. They actually did say if the county continues on its course of maintaining its strong fund balances, as well as if the economy and the assessed valuation continues to grow, that down the road, and we're hoping maybe as soon as the next bond issue, there could be some consideration for an upgrade. But still, at the rating level you're at, the AA minus, that is a very good rating. The sale of the bonds actually occurred yesterday at noon. We came over to the courthouse here, and we set up the laptop and watched all the bids come in. The bond market has been pretty strong over the last few months, although it's starting to get a little bit nervous, I think, in advance of the election. So we hadn't been seeing quite as many bids on some recent sales that we had been conducting. And going into the sale yesterday, I was kind of expecting probably 2 or 3 bids. I'm pleased to report that we actually ended up getting 5 bids on the county's bonds. And the other handout that I've got, you'll see on one page there's a list of the 5 different bids that were received. If you look there, the best bid, in other words, the firm that was offering to buy the bonds with the lowest interest rate, was submitted by Country Club Bank with a true interest cost of 1.334707%. That is a wonderful rate. And as you can see, it's quite a bit lower even than the cover bid, the next lowest interest rate. And then you can see below Country Club's bid, the other 4 bids that were received. We reviewed the bids, checked to make sure it met all the bidding parameters, and it was mathematically correct, and it was. And so, and Country Club Bank also then provided their good faith deposit. So, in our opinion, this is a good bid, and particularly the interest rate is very, very aggressive. And I was pleased to see that the response, the number of bidders. So that really kind of the result. Because of the way Country Club Bank structured their bid, they actually bid with a premium. That premium that they bid, since it's not needed, that money that they bid as a premium would not be needed to pay off the temporary notes. What we were able to do is resize the bond issue, and as a result, the issue size dropped from $9,235,000 over. If you look on the back page, the back side of that same page, you'll see that the final par amount of the bonds ended up being $8,830,000. So it was a nice bid. We were able to then use the premium that they offered as part of their bid to resize the bond issue. The only action item left for the commission to take today with regards to the issuance of the bonds is the adoption of a bond resolution. And Gina Rekoff with Gilmore & Bell is here, who I'm sure would be happy to address with you exactly what that resolution does, but that would be the final step in the issuance process. So, welcome. Obviously, any questions you might have about the rating, the sale, the market?
No, I just wish previous board wouldn't have borrowed money in 2015 ahead of the collection of the sales tax, because they were going to be historical low rates at that time. I believe they were 2.8 or something, or 2. Yeah. So no, this is, like I said, it's a very good rate. I thought our rating would be a little better, but what's going on in the world today? It's wonder. We can get anything, I guess.
Yeah, the AA minus is a very, very good. It's
but our county appraisals are through the roof, and people are selling homes for more than what they're asking for them. And like I said, our county, as far as I think, is doing really well, considering what's going on in the world.
Do you know what the bond rating for the state of Kansas is right now?
It is AA, but I can't remember if it's minus, just straight AA, or plus. Yeah, it might be one notch above your rating.
What impacts that?
There's a lot of criteria that they look at. They look at The one big thing that that plays part of the rating that you have direct control over is fund balances. Particularly, they like to look at your general fund, and there's a couple of other funds that they also like to look at, and they want to see how much excess savings, essentially, you have in there. So if you just look at your audit, what they do is tend to look at the unencumbered fund balance in the general fund as well as a couple other funds. The other things, though, that go into the rating are the economy. And you guys benefit, not just from the economy of the county, but your proximity in the metro area is also a benefit. They look at, as part of the economy, they look at the growth in the tax base, and that was definitely cited as a positive. They also look at debt levels, and when they look at the debt levels, they just don't look at what the county has outstanding, but they also look at the debt for all the underlying taxing jurisdictions, like the cities and the school districts. And then they also look at sort of just financial management. What sort of policies and practices do you have as a county to manage your finances? So those are kind of the big things: the fund balances, the economy, debt levels, and financial management. Yeah.
Well, both the schools in our areas got significant debt.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
They're building new schools.
Yeah, no, that weighs into their analysis. Yep.
Okay. And then I'm not a big fan of large reserves either, because we're taking it out of the taxpayers' savings and putting it in ours, and I just don't agree with that. So I guess.
Yeah, and I guess the question would be, how large? I mean, are they? We have a fairly significant.
I got the impression when talking to the analyst after the rating call that your fund balance levels are good. I don't think increasing them over the levels that they're at right now would automatically mean an upgrade for you. I think you do have good, healthy fund balances now. I think preserving them is probably something that you need to look at doing. Maybe not drawing them down, at least in terms of a rating. I think that the bigger thing that they were looking at was simply the continued growth in your economy and your evaluation. That seemed to be the thing that they were focusing on that, in the future might cause an upgrade.
No, when you say valuations, are you meaning valuations on land or?
Yeah, just generally the overall assessed and appraised valuation of the property within the county.
Which we've had big increases.
That was cited. You've had very nice growth over the last 5 to 10 years in your assessed valuation, and I think they would, if they could see that continue a few more years, I think that's when you'd be an ideal candidate for an upgrade or to be considered for it.
Of course, if we see too much of that continuing, our taxpayers here are going to be screaming because they can't pay all these taxes. It's a two-edged sword.
No, it is. No, and that's exactly how the fund balance is. What the rating agencies like to see in terms of credit quality sometimes may be a little bit different than what taxpayers want to see.
Do you get any benefit if you have a few $1 billion worth of unassessed property at all?
That is a good question, and they do view large federal and state institutions as credit positive, even though there's a lot of valuation that's not being taxed. I think they like the stability that those institutions offer, and that's cited in the rating report too.
Okay.
Maybe they figure we get something in lieu of taxes. Anyways.
I just want to thank you and your team and staff for all your hard work. That's great.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, and I'm real pleased with these results. That bid, like I said, I was expecting 2 or 3 bids. When we got 5, I was overjoyed, and then when I saw the bid from Country Club, I was real pleased with that.
Well, they've got multiple locations in the county, which is great to see. None of these other groups even have a footprint here. So.
Yeah, and I think that played a part in why they were so aggressive in their bidding, was their local presence.
Well, that's good. Any other questions? So we need to pass the resolutions, accept these?
Yes.
Yes.
That would be the resolution 2020-40.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion for the chairman to sign Resolution 2020-40? 4. It was 40? 40.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the resolution for the bond sale? Voting?
Aye.
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 Commissioner Cox votes aye.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're ready for Public Works. Mr. Knoll, are you taking this?
Yeah.
All right. Well, just seen transfer station and Public Works.
So, today before you, we have for your consideration a request for board action for the approval of a lease of 3 case backhoes for the transfer station. What we did was we wrote specifications for a 5-year, 5,000-hour lease per machine with a full equipment repair warranty and the requirement to supply a loaner machine if the machine repair is going to take more than 24 hours. Also included is the all fluids and all filters required for routine maintenance. The yearly cost of the leases for all 3 machines total is $41,736. This equates to a 5-year cost of $208,680. We did bid the machines for outright purchase, so we could do a cost analysis comparison of the lease options versus those straight-out purchasing options. It equated to a $62,390 upfront savings cost, or a back-end equivalent trade-in value of $63,000 or $62,390. Because that's what you're looking at is your upfront savings on the lease. You receive that trade-in value upfront instead of at the back end when you would normally sell these machines to replace them in a replacement cycle. And on top of that $62,000, currently the transfer station reported that they had spent a large sum of money repairing their current machines over the course of the last 4 years, and that savings could have been in excess of $70,000 at that time. And so the total equivalent savings after fluids and filters is in excess of $100,000 upfront because if these machines had the same mechanical issues that the current machines at the transfer station had. I'm open to try to answer any questions you have regarding these lease options.
The routine maintenance will still be performed by our shop.
Yes, but they provide the fluids and filters. They like to do that. Generally helps from my
So our guys still have to go over, pick up the machine, take it to our shop, and do the maintenance and bring it back.
Yes, they just provide the fluids and filters.
Would be nice if the maintenance was improved so our guys at the road department didn't have to do all that. It's not real efficient to go over there and pick them up, bring them in. You're just taking time from road department work.
Yep.
Bill, you mentioned the wear and tear obviously is substantial on this equipment, and so I didn't know what the cost was of a new piece, but based on everything we've talked about to date, the lease option seems to make more sense. My concern is just 1,000 hours a year, right? If I'm reading that right, so you're 80 hours a month, 20 hours a week. I don't know how many hours we typically put on one of these machines. Is that a concern at all? Because it's kind of like, that car lease that allows for so many miles, and all of a sudden you're 3,000 miles over.
The 5,000 hours from what was reported by the director of the department would be adequate
Sufficient.
amount, sufficient that they would cover.
That's why they have 3 machines.
That's why they have 3 machines.
Yeah, I realize you're not all running at the same time, and you're not running them 40 hours a week. I just want to make sure that wasn't missed anywhere.
Basically, you're running them at 50% capacity because of, you got
2,080 hours a year work.
Yeah, and so you're looking at running each one on average 20 hours a week, 50% time, in order to get 1,000 hours. And what we'll do now, if this is the direction that we're going to move in the future, obviously we can do an analysis at the end or near the end of this process where we can look at the number of hours per machine and the number of breakdowns that we have with the type of machine that we have bid and see if it'd be more appropriate to do 2 machines at 6,500 hours, or if it's 3 machines at 5,000 hours, or how they, what the process is. That'd be something that the department director can convey to us, and we can write specifications for however they would like to proceed with that.
It's a little different use of machine than what the road department does with their machines. They go through a pretty rough workout out the transfer station. So, I think this looks good. I mean, I think this is a good option. Anybody else have any questions of Mr. Knoll? I'll entertain a motion to approve the lease of 3 backhoes
So moved.
for the transfer station.
Second.
Have a motion, a second. Any further discussion on the lease of 3 backhoes for the transfer station?
Just real quick, so we'll make this motion, but if it, after further analysis, if it makes more sense to go from 3 to 2 based on hours and downtime and, break fix and all of that, then you can revise accordingly.
That wouldn't be probably until close to the end of this current.
You're talking about, okay, you
Yeah.
just review after this
Yeah, after this, if
for the next lease cycle.
If we
Okay.
find that because we're fully covered under warranty that, and we don't have the lack of machines because we have that replacement machine in there in a 24-hour breakdown situation, if we find that, a different lease option would be more appropriate, we can write specifications for that in the future. But we need to move forward with an analysis of that with machines that aren't broken down on a regular basis.
Not fair to use our current benchmark, is your point.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
where we're at.
All right.
Any more discussion and voting?
Aye.
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 Vicki?
Commissioner Costa, aye.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
All right, we are ready for discussion on building codes. Crystal, how are you today?
Well, Mr. Chairman, how are you?
Good.
Morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I have before you a request to adopt Resolution 2020-39. This resolution would adopt the 2006 International Building Code and the 2006 International Residential Code for 1 and 2 family dwellings. So I would like to make a clarification to a statement that was made earlier that it would not cover commercial. That is incorrect. The International Building Code does cover commercial development. That was one of the biggest concerns of our Building Code Committee, actually. You all know why we're here. In 2018, the Linwood tornado highlighted a weak spot in Leavenworth County's lack of building codes. You all commissioned our office to put together a Building Codes Committee, which we did. That Building Codes Committee was approved by this board. The Building Codes Committee had substantial conversation. Some of the things we did talk about are, should we adopt the latest and the greatest because we are moving towards adoption, or should we start somewhere that seems more manageable, especially for a county that has not had building codes? The consensus of the committee was to start somewhere more manageable, and we had discussion between the 2006 and the 2012 building codes, and the consensus came down to 2006 building codes. Primarily, like I said, because that seemed more manageable then. I believe we talked about this previously. There have been significant upgrades and updates to the more recent codes regarding sustainability, climate control, things of that nature. In fact, those are things that while the City of Leavenworth has adopted the 2018 code, they have written those things out of their code. Again, I've also spoken to you all several times in that the City of Leavenworth, their building codes official, was very, very helpful in the writing of this resolution, in the writing and in this recommendation. So just to clarify a couple of things, this would only apply to new construction. It's not retroactive. It would apply in the event that your home was destroyed and you were rebuilding your home, of course, then the home would need to be built. This does not apply to agricultural buildings unless they are being built for commercial use, and I think that's a very important clarification that we need to make. I anticipate that in the coming years that will be an argument that gets made that an agricultural building does not require building codes, so even if it's being used as an event barn, why should it be required to be built to code? However, it is the opinion of my office and our Building Codes Committee that those must be built to code. More than anything else, those must be built to code. Furthermore, like I said, it would not apply if you were doing a home remodel to your kitchen or something of that nature. If you're replacing your hot water heater, it's only in the event that it is new construction or it's reconstruction of 51% or more.
Chris, you just said something there just for my clarification. When you say commercial, and then it's my understanding that ag law pretty much trumps all other law, at least in the state of Kansas anyway. There's a big difference between, you got a commercial operation, whether that's any type of farm or ranch, versus an event hall. Those aren't one and the same. One sees residents, members of the public. The other doesn't. I mean,
Sure.
it's a private entity.
Correct.
And so just like the statement earlier today of, a building over 5,000 square feet, this requirement of being sprinkled, like that's a non-starter. Like you can't, you're not even able to sprinkle half the buildings that are out in the county because of the infrastructure coming to them. And we might not be able to sprinkler the industrial park. So anyway, I just thought that was an interesting point earlier. But drawing a line between when we've said, hey, we have some concern about some of these, commercial buildings, but those serve the public. They have lots of resident participation and attendance. That's
Correct.
not one and the same versus a massive building that's being served for ag that houses tons of equipment that doesn't.
Right. No. So I do want to draw the distinction. If we're talking about a barn that is used for agricultural purposes, that does not need to be built to code. What happens? This is something that we run into even with special use permits for event centers. The claim is that it's agritourism, therefore it's exempt from our zoning and subdivision regulations and such because it's agritourism. I'm building a barn for agritourism. I'm going to have 350 people every weekend in this barn that is for agritourism. I just want to make sure that the distinction is clear that yes, it may be an agritourism barn. However, it is a commercial structure because you're inviting the public in. It is being used in a commercial way. So I just want to make sure that clarification is being made openly and publicly because I do anticipate that being an issue down the road.
So just one point, I did speak with the chief about the event centers and the requirement that he's asking about, and he said there is a way to implement sprinklers in those facilities, which is, I guess you bring a 500-gallon tank and there's a pump system that can still be implemented to put sprinklers in over 500 or 5,000 square feet facilities. So that would be his answer to that.
Right. So you can solve anything with money. It's just no longer
Right.
Right. It just
Right.
becomes a non-starter. So.
It's just, I think the concern is if you have large groups of people and then there was a fire.
But we have a lot of other agriculture businesses in our county that aren't agritourism businesses.
Which that's different.
Yeah, they should not be under the code. I mean, they're stirring fertilizer or seed in it.
That's different.
That should be different. But normally, most of them buildings are built a little stellar than the average farm barn. But, yeah. And
But it's
there
interesting
was-
the community with the most growth has the oldest code.
Yeah, that's why. So I had a question and concern earlier, well, a few years back when we had the urban growth management issue in our county. And there was some discussion that, well, if the county doesn't have its own codes, that the city codes would be enforced in the urban growth management area. Is that accurate or partially accurate?
They're asking about the urban
I think
growth
that's a great
areas.
question for Mr. Van Paris.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, thank you. And that question was discussed by your staff. I would like to break that whole topic into three basic questions. The first would be, can a city unilaterally extend its building codes out into the unincorporated areas of the county, either for residential or commercial? And the answer to that is no. Second would be, can the building codes of a city be extended into the unincorporated areas of the county by way of a growth management agreement? The answer to that is yes. However, that requires the discretionary act upon the part of this board to allow the extension of those codes either in entirety or in part. And the third is, if you adopt building codes, it does not preclude additional building codes through a development agreement, but it does not allow or open the door for the extension of city codes into more or less a vacuum. So if you wished to impose, and I'll use that word, impose stricter building codes through a development agreement, that is allowable. However, that also requires a public hearing process, public notice, and a hearing before this board. So I do not think that the citizens would need to be overly concerned about an ambush of a substantial increase in the standards that would be imposed, either through adoption of a resolution by this board or through a growth management agreement. It's required that notice be given before these codes are adopted.
So if there was an area that was established, an urban growth management area outside the city limits, it would just cover the zoning portion of it?
It could. It would really be a discretionary act on this board if the city wished to make, as part of their plan proposed to this body, an extension of building codes that were dissimilar to yours. That would be a factor to be considered. If you voted to allow it, yes, it could be extended. If you did not vote to allow it, the answer would be no. The city's building codes would stop at the city limits.
Okay. But the statute says the city can establish an urban growth management area. So if they don't enforce their codes and they don't enforce their zoning, what good would that do?
I think that statute actually states that if they can only extend their zoning if the county doesn't already have zoning.
There's a difference between zoning and building codes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
In the absence of zoning, a city has a statutory right to extend their zoning up to 3 miles outside their corporate boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
However, you have zoning, so that vacuum does not exist. No such vacuum rule exists with respect to building codes.
Okay, so if we already have zoning in place, what good would the urban growth management area establishing it do?
Well, each urban growth management establishment is to be examined on a particular case-by-case basis, and that's a very good hypothetical question. That may be why we really don't have those in Leavenworth County.
Okay.
What was the major difference or reason why your committee went with 2006 as opposed to 2012? Is there any specific difference between those two codes that you can point to?
Honestly, I think, so some of the communities that have upgraded, they've upgraded very, very recently. I believe that many members of the committee were very familiar with the 2006 codes because it wasn't that long ago that those were the codes that were being utilized by many.
So your committee wasn't necessarily opposed to 2012 codes, but they were used to working with 2006?
They were used to working with 2006, yes. Like I said, there were some in 2012, some substantial changes to the sustainability portion of the code that the committee did not feel we necessarily needed to adopt. And we would instead, and then this was a conversation again that I had with other building officials, we would have been adopting the 2012 code, but potentially with significant amendments that would have kicked it back to the 2006 code. And they're not opposed to it, and certainly if this board wishes to adopt a newer code, absolutely that's something that we would bring back before you all. He said it was very much yes, it felt builders were very familiar with the 2006 codes. The 2006 codes offered an appropriate level of protection. The 2006 codes were manageable and were providing some of the things that we really need in Leavenworth County.
But you
It's kind of more rigid than basic.
Yeah, well, yeah. But you can't point to anything off the top of your head specific.
No.
Okay.
Crystal, was staff able to go do some of this insurance research and due diligence we discussed? So if you look at a Douglas, or if you look at, again, another county within 30 minutes that has code, if someone was going to build a $150,000 home or a $300,000 home, it's not very hard to get, and again, you have a home type, but it's not very hard to get insurance quotes and premiums. So there's been this, in my opinion, a lot of disinformation relative to the cost. Were we able to get any actual detail on that?
So I did make some inquiries, and the best answer I could get was a maybe. So you can't. Both insurance companies that I contacted said that you can't do a comparison from Leavenworth County to Wyandotte County to Douglas County or Johnson County, because what has a bigger impact on your premium is your zip code and potentially your credit rating than anything that is building code related. So both entities said, will there be instances where your premium may go up? Yes. Will there be instances where your premium may go down? Yes. Either way, it's probably not significant enough that anybody will notice it. It's just that non-committal, I guess, a little bit on their part, but also that it is such a small factor when considering premiums that one insurance company said they don't even look at it as far as they just assume codes are there, and when they quote it anyways, because they feel like they're going to be bringing it back to code, and they have a 25% window margin, I guess. If your house is valued at its actual value, they have a 25% margin for reconstruction because of building codes and things like that. A lot of times rebuilding your home actually is less expensive building it to code, because if you have a house that was 50 years old, that product's not even available. I mean, you can't buy asbestos siding and stuff like that. So
if you think about it, I mean, going to 2012, how many homes have been built between 2012 and now? So if you figure within Leavenworth County, a few hundred homes every year, and I realize it can be in surplus of that,
right.
But over an 8-year period, you're talking about a couple thousand homes,
right?
Over in comparison to how many homes we actually have in the county, meaning the majority. So and the cities within it, right. The majority are already out of code.
Yeah,
I mean, that is one thing to consider and all that, but
Absolutely.
It does not shock me that one's credit rating or amount of debt would have a bigger impact.
And that is the zip code. And obviously, that's why, because I asked them, I said, well, do you have houses that would be similar in Leavenworth County and Wyandotte County or Douglas? And they said it wouldn't be a fair comparison because each household is considered on its merits. The crime rate in your zip code makes a big difference. So the same person owning a $300,000 home in Leavenworth County and a $300,000 home in Wyandotte County, if everything was equal other than that zip code, would pay more. So it's in Wyandotte County because of that zip code. So that was both groups. When I talked to them, that's what the feedback that I got is that you can't. It's considered on a house by house, person by person. You can't say carte blanche. Overall rates will go up, or rates will go down, or rates would stay flat.
And you say, according to them, the zip code difference is keyed to the crime rate?
That's their story.
One of the factors.
I mean, that's their story. I mean, that's how they explained it. I don't know if there are other factors involved with that zip code, but yes. I know that at one point in time in the south end of the county, and it's still the case on some, that people had a Wyandotte County zip code because it was at Bonner Springs and they were actually in Leavenworth County. And they did pay higher insurance premiums on their vehicles and on their homes because the insurance companies are evaluated by zip code.
And that was like on County Road 2.
Way out there.
Yeah.
Well, close to Baser.
Well, the South Estate at one time was a Bonner Springs zip code. So half of Baser was Bonner Springs post office and half of Baser was the Baser post office. And I know the city went through a process of getting that changed down to about the Turnpike area, or the I-70 area. And that made a difference for those folks and insurance premiums. But that is more impactful, and your credit rating is more impactful than the building codes. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because that just shows your crime rate is actually impacting your insurance.
Well,
Oh, yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's a higher probability of your home being set on fire.
Well, I mean, that's something the public should know.
Crystal, we also had a conversation about, barn homes and how many of the building permits we issued in last year and even 2020. How would this impact those, to the best of your knowledge?
Sure. So I think your statement previously about if money can solve a whole litany of problems, right? Again, I've had substantial conversations with a couple of building officials and a couple of things about barn homes. One, there are companies who put together barn home packages that are made to be built to code. They are not just steel Morton buildings that you come in and put in some 2x4s and put up some drywall and call it a house. That will not pass code. That will not. Does that happen currently? Yes. Yes, it does. Can Morton buildings, pole barns, and that sort of thing be modified in order to be built to code? Yes, it may be substantially more expensive. It may absolutely be. However, it can be done. But again, barn homes are a very popular trend right now. Like I said, there are a number of companies who they're kind of like modular homes almost, that there are companies that build them and provide the building plans and such, and you order them and they come to you and you build them, and if you build them correctly, they will be built to code. In some cases, they'll be built to a code higher than 2006 because there's one company that's out of the Pacific Northwest, out of Oregon. I don't think anywhere in Oregon is still working off of a 2006 building code.
What's left of it?
Sure, yes. So, yes, it can be done, but certainly there is some construction that currently takes place in Leavenworth County that will not be allowed any longer. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
We're also making assumptions. We're not inspecting it now. So
Correct.
To say it's just 2x4s and sheetrock, I don't think it's fair either.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Right.
Garden hose for plumbing and extension cord for electrical.
I would like to tell you I've never seen that, but
I know. Are there any other questions, Crystal, before we open up the public hearing on this matter? Then I'll open up the public hearing on the building codes. Anyone here wanting to speak in the public hearing on building codes? Come forward.
Sherry Grogan. Good morning, by the way.
Good morning.
16635 Leavenworth Road. I'm the president of Rural Leavenworth, Inc. We wanted to give you a little feedback. We conducted a survey. We have 45 paid members. 11 people responded, so that's 24%. But we had 54.5% that said they were in favor of the proposed resolution, and 45.4% saying no, they were not. And some of the comments were the effective codes require inspection and enforcement. If you don't have these, there's no point of imposing them. We already talked about that. And then someone wanted clarification on if the additions were greater than or equal to 50%, if the rest of the house needed to be brought up to code. So that not just a new addition, but the old existing part. That was an open question. And then someone also said they're only for roofing codes. There's a big issue there that's perceived. And then one more thing, they wanted to see the actual codes with the marked up changes, being able to more easily see that. And then
They're in those books.
shops.
Big books.
There it is.
You mean from the difference?
It needs to be easy for the public to understand. What are the codes? We've taken some things out. So, and then just shops, the building of shops that are not really agricultural. We have a lot of 2.5 acreage in the county, or 5 acres, and if you put a shop up, but you don't have.
It's only for residential, it's not for garages.
Yeah,
Okay.
no
As long as it's not attached.
No accessory buildings.
Okay, good.
So on that question, the first question, I was going to ask Crystal on that. If there was a 51%, and would the rest of the house need to be brought up?
So I think if you are increasing the size by more than 51%, or you are adding value 51% or more, it is my understanding that the appraiser's office considers that to be new construction. In that case, we would consider that to be new construction.
So yes.
So the whole house has to be bought up.
If your house was half destroyed and you rebuild it, or more than 51%,
Right.
then yes.
And
Well,
we're
let's
going to
just-
take it off the tax roll
Yeah.
until it's rebuilt, if it's over 51%.
But let's say it's not destructed, and it's just, we're going to add an addition and increase the size, and the old part
And it's more
is
than
not.
half, more than 50%?
Yeah, so I thought a lot of the discussion was anything under 50%. So again, if it's a 2,000 square foot home and there's a 1,000 square foot addition, then that's under the 51%. So it would not be held to the same standard. Now, I thought that standard was if it was greater than 51%, that portion, so that new construction, and not retroactive to try to make a home that's 50 years old.
Right. The rest of the house would have to be brought up to code.
Because of how
entire house.
how the appraiser is looking at it, that it's a new construction versus a
The entire house would be.
Is there a process or built into this where it could be appealed?
Yes, so that will be one of the next, if this resolution is adopted, the very next thing we need to do, we need to put together a Board of Appeals.
So I guess
We
that would
wouldn't use
be
our current Board of Zoning Appeals. We'd have to have a Building Codes
It
Appeal
needs to
Board.
be, yes, it needs to be comprised of building
Okay,
experts.
and we wouldn't use our Planning Commission members
No.
because they can only switch the name tag twice. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Good morning. In working with Ms. Voth with respect to the building Court of Appeals, the concept was to use persons who were familiar with the building industry so that, because we presume the majority of people bringing appeals before that body would be either builders or property owners currently involved in the building process and have access to a builder. To form a committee of people qualified to sit on that board, and also to have it constituted so that it could meet more regularly than once a month, more or less, that it could meet almost on an as-needed basis. Because the county does realize, or your staff realizes, that when a homeowner's building a home, somebody's building a commercial building that would fall under this resolution, they do not want undue delays, and we do not wish to cause undue delays. So the concept was that Board of Appeals would be, again, of qualified persons, and secondly, would be structured so that it could meet on demand and in a timely fashion so as not to unduly delay construction.
And how many members would that need to be?
I believe the original, I think it's called out in the code, I think it's a minimum of 5.
So if we did adopt these codes, within this resolution, there's no mechanism to revisit every couple of years to look at the, say in 5 years from now we want to move from the 2006 codes or whatever codes we adopt to a little modification of that.
Sure.
Would that be the same? Could that be written in that same resolution that would be that same group of people could do that same operation?
Well, Do you mean the building codes, the Board of Appeals, or the Building Codes Committee?
Well, we had the Building Codes Committee that we appointed earlier.
Right.
And then you're now talking about this building code appeals that would have to be brought. Could we also build that in that every year so that same committee would look at our codes?
Yeah, so I think that would be a natural course of action, is that any amendments going forward would be offered by your Board of Appeals for your building.
Then they could review it every couple of years or whatever.
Yes, we can certainly write that into the resolution. I don't know that is really necessary to do.
Go ahead.
Commissioner Stephen, the statute, more or less, while it does allow you to adopt building codes, they have to be adopted with specificity. And if, for example, this book of codes were to be amended by the international body, that amendment does not automatically carry over. You would have to amend your resolution to specifically adopt any change to that code, so that a body sitting somewhere, or an international body sitting somewhere, could not at a great distance affect a code that would be applied in Leavenworth County. It would have to be adopted in Leavenworth County, and it would have to go through the same process that this resolution went through.
What I'm saying is that maybe in our resolution we should have a mechanism to update those codes periodically.
Most cities do it whenever the next, like the 2018 codes came out, and then they update, and maybe they'll go to a 2012.
But maybe
or they stay the same, like Baser often stay the same for
Every 2 years, the new codes come out, and that's usually when they're considered, and you either leave it as it is or you adopt new ones. But I think I don't think that in the resolution is probably the place to include the annual or semi-annual review. I think it'll just be like Crystal said, it's a natural process when the new codes come out.
And that could be brought up in a quarterly report. Crystal could say, hey,
I just wanted to be an orderly mechanism for that to regularly happen, somehow established.
And it really does every 2 years, I think. In the 2 years?
Correct. Every 2 years, new codes are released. And certainly, as we put together our Board of Appeals with highly qualified individuals, I would imagine that, especially if we see the same sorts of issues repeatedly, that at that point we'd say we need to talk about fixing this. So, is my understanding that is how the cities handle it? Is their Board of Appeals? They get together and they go through the code and either say it's fine or it's time to go ahead and update with amendments and such. So,
Mr. Van Ferris?
Commissioners, I hate to keep intruding in your public hearing, but since you're in your public hearing, these could be germane to the public discussion. I would first like to apologize, but offer a proposed amendment that I think would clarify this. In the resolution as presented to you, the word residential is used. I would like to suggest that the amendment the resolution be amended to show that where the word residential is used, that it be residential and commercial. Prior to that, it references certain residential and commercial. So I wish to offer that amendment so that it clarifies the fact that there can be overlap in that although these codes are primarily directed at single-family residences, from time to time, certain of these codes could apply to commercial use. The second thing I'd like to put before you is a point of clarification, and that's with respect to the 51% rule. Commissioners Stephen and Shimke brought up good points, and that is this. If I have a 1,000 square foot building, let's say residential building, and it's damaged, and 500 square feet of it is destroyed, my repair is not considered new construction, and it would not be under the jurisdiction of this resolution. If 600 square feet of it is destroyed, the building comes into the code. That new part of the building would be built under this code. It would not require the homeowner to go through and tear out the existing plumbing or tear out the existing wiring and bring that part up to code. I would suggest, as a practical matter, if, for example, and I'll just speak from personal experience, if you have a home that doesn't have an electrical circuit panel up to code, you're going to want to change that anyway. So the primary purpose of public safety, I think, would still be met. But you would not have to tear the entire building down and rebuild it to code. The new portion would have to be built to code.
Okay, that's a good clarification.
And you are signing that you're building it to code. You're not inspecting.
Commissioners, the issue of inspection has been put out on the table, and I think it is an issue deserving of discussion. The county has not contemplated at this point in time, in fact, it's not contemplated at any point in time, of creating an inspection group, hiring personnel to do building inspections, and require new construction under this resolution to be under the control of those inspectors. In other words, before you put the drywall up, you have to have the wiring inspector in. I think we're all familiar with the concept of an inspection process. That is not part of this resolution. The primary intent of this is to create a requirement, one that is probably already being complied with. Secondly, that creates liability on the part of the builder, that they are building you a home that meets these basic codes. There are newer codes. I think Chief Smith, who did an excellent job of researching this issue, did bring up one thing. Each of the cities has a different code right now. So your adoption of the 2006 code means that instead of 4 building codes out in the county, there's now 5, or within Leavenworth County. These codes, although they change over the years, they're not what I would refer to as a sea change. Certain aspects of it change, and that makes a new code. 95% of it probably did not change at all. So there are basic elements within any of these codes. But the whole issue as far as the inspection process is that the liability is on the builder. We're not going to be delaying your construction by having your builder wait for a county inspector to show up. The onus is on you as the builder to build it to code. If you do not build it to code and you do not comply with this resolution, it creates a greater level of civil liability on the part of the builder to the person who they built for as to the quality of the construction they provided. That is really the enforcement mechanism.
David, to build on that a little bit versus what the chief had shared, so when you talk about onus or liability on the builder, right, meeting kind of a certain set of standards. So we don't have those, now. So if there was an accident or an incident, whether you had codes and didn't inspect them, or whether you didn't have codes, how is the negligence or the potential liability of the county any different? You know what I mean? Like, you could make the argument that something happened because there weren't codes, just as easy as you could make the argument that something happened even though there are codes, you didn't enforce the codes you had. Like, that seems like a lawyer's dream. Walk me through that.
Well, it gets better. Actually, your point is it's a very good one. And under Kansas law, as harsh as it may sound, if the county has standards and either does not inspect or even negligently inspects, it creates no liability to the county. It does create liability to the person who did not follow the code that led to the failure. I don't want to belabor it, but under law, if I build you a house and there are no building codes at all, I'm still under the obligation to provide you a building that meets generally accepted practices. The problem with a current homeowner is if they're in court against that builder, what is that generally accepted practice? It's so nebulous that it becomes very costly, probably prohibitively difficult for a homeowner to hold that builder responsible. If you have codes, the generally accepted practice is within the codes you've adopted, and it makes it easier for a homeowner to hold a builder responsible.
Anyone else want to speak in our public hearing?
Morning.
Morning. Wes Armstrong, 22451 139th Street, Baser, Kansas.
Morning.
Glad I got to listen to everybody before I came up here and talked. A lot of good points. The fire chief touched on a lot of the points that I was wanting to talk about at the beginning. for sure. Second, too, though, with those ag buildings that he's talking about, and fire sprinklers and such, and not allowing, I mean, this is amending people building new ones, but it's not saving lives for those people walking into those places that are being built. You're not requiring those buildings to get up to code as far as that either. So I think that's an issue also. So you're just allowing the buildings that you know are unsafe for people to walk into instead of somehow bringing them up to code. I think that's the unfair advantage. Also, a couple things too. People acting as their own general contractors in the county, building their own homes. That creates their own liability. I guess if that's being done quite a bit. I'm sure you're aware of that. People hiring their own.
We are.
Yeah. So I mean, how does that, with no inspector to enforce any of those? How do you help those people also? Especially since obviously none of them have already booked that size or even know one like that exists. They're gonna just come file for the permit and act as their own general contractor without even knowing rules or regulations, and they're going to subpar do some of the work themselves or hire people out, and piecemeal together. That's with no inspections done. It's kind of hard to ensure that you're providing safe houses in the county that are being built to code. A couple other things. I think one of the main things too that's not in most of the codes in even 2012 or 6 or anything. Soil conservation is a big thing with me. I think we see it a lot in our county. We're really rich in topsoil. We have a lot of it. We take it for granted a lot. I think the Midwest takes a lot of that for granted. And when the builders come in and take your 80 or 100 or 200 acres and they just roll the dirt around, most of them try and save some of it, but they're not really conserving that. They're just mixing in the topsoil with the clay and then backfilling with whatever's easiest and convenient. And then when they're putting in their roads and stuff also, I think the main thing that we're missing is trying to hold people accountable for that. As the picture shows behind you, I mean, we're here in the Midwest. We're kind of liable to provide a lot of food for the whole United States. And with most of our soil going down the Mississippi River into the Gulf of Mexico, how do we make that a sustainable future for us?
We have stormwater pollution when we do subdivision. It's in our subdivision regulation.
Really on site, but you're losing the site. You're losing that area of grow. I mean, you're not saving the topsoil. You're not conserving the topsoil for what its intentional purpose is. You can't make topsoil. I mean, it's something that takes millions and millions of years. I know I'm getting on a different subject. I get it.
Because we only deal with the stormwater pollution part of it, and that's
I get it.
And we have that in place.
I understand. I'm just trying to make something better. So
okay.
But I think without having any enforcement for any of this, it's going to be a losing battle. I think the county would prefer to see some inspections or certifications or something.
Oh, you don't get our emails in, do you?
Well, I think the feedback that I've been getting, I understand, but I feel like providing, this is a great effort. I think it's just falls short in some areas. So, any questions for me?
Question for you. You understand that one of the greatest, we're a very litigious society. If you convey your property to another person and then they determine that it wasn't up to code,
right,
then they will have, under this, they'll have a course of action in civil court.
For the person who built their
that
own
we
house.
would be establishing that liability by passing this. So that's what we haven't had in the past, and now we would have that. So that's one thing. The second thing is, would you rather see us pass nothing, or would you rather go with this?
I would rather. I mean, like you say, if you pass it, so you're not going to get back to it for a while. I mean, why not? I mean, we have an opportunity now to fix some changes and then pass it in a month, or next meeting. And why not try and fix it now instead of in 2 years?
I just don't see us ever going to a system where we're going to have a big group of bureaucrats and inspectors like they do in Johnson County.
I agree.
This is Commissioner Bob.
Go ahead.
I think in answer to one of the concerns expressed, if an individual chooses to pull a building permit, even if it's that person building their own residence, they're going to sign off that they understand and agree that they will do their construction to meet the code required.
That is correct. They'll sign off on it.
Mm-hmm.
Not understanding it. Okay.
Well,
We're trying to move in the direction.
Understanding not negate the requirement.
Right. No, I agree with that. I'm just having building codes with no inspectors or certifications is, I think, again, falling short. And again, not holding people with these larger buildings, hosting 300 people every weekend, to not have proper protection for the people entering their buildings is also not. And then allowing other people that are going to be building to be up to code, but not enforcing them to get their building up to code is another issue too that I have.
This is Commissioner Cos again. I have a question for Mr. Van Terrapin. Is it within the purview of the county commissioners to require any building that is used, commercial building that is used for the public purposes, like an event building, if they do not have sprinkler systems or fire suppression systems in place, can we require that they post that?
Commissioner Cos, my short answer is yes. I think the issue of let's use the actual specific case we've been discussing, the event barn. Those have almost invariably come before the Board of County Commissioners through the special use permit process. As part of the special use permit process, the board, the planning commission, your staff, and eventually the Board of County Commissioners could impose additional fire security and public safety conditions on that building above and beyond the building code itself, because in that case you're looking at a specific use, a special use. If, for example, fire protection, sprinkling could be provided by a water system infrastructure supporting it, that could be made part of the requirement of the special use permit. If a special use permit comes up for renewal, additional fire protection and public safety issues could be addressed at that time. If the county were to adopt a regulation that if you do not have fire sprinkling, you must post that in a conspicuous spot at the entrance, I think that, because you're not requiring any additional construction or real change, that could be made retroactive and applicable to existing event barns or other such facilities. So to the surprise of Commissioner Culbertson, I'm going to give you a one-word answer, yes.
Just a reminder,
one word.
It's amazing.
Governments are notoriously good for spending other people's money. That's a horrible thing. At the end of the day, I can take you to every one of the cities in Leavenworth County and show you areas that don't have proper sewer access, don't have retainage, don't have stormwater. You can't bring everybody up to a particular standard at the same time. Lots of areas without sidewalk, lots of areas without curb. Those are all things that are required in every city, and I can show you dozens, if not hundreds of examples where that's not the case. So it's one thing for new construction going into a project knowing what the expectations are versus trying to hold people to standards that have been around for 5 years, 25 years, or 55 years, or 100 years. Like, that's not realistic. Now, I do get your concern. I think it's a fair one. You do have businesses that are probably they're going to fall outside of the code. But I shared with you earlier that I'd say 75, 80% of the homes within every one of these cities, because of how many get built between now and when the last code was out, are already out of code. So all you can do is try to do your best to improve things going forward. I don't think you can ever write over history. It is what it is. So
I think you made a fair point that I didn't fully understand when those special use permits come up every 5 years or 2 years or whatever it is. You can help them.
5 to 10 years on some of these. Some of them got 10 years because they had a significant investment.
Right. So that's not bad.
At the same time, but we also get feedback on these special use permits on requirements come from emergency management and the fire departments. And no one's ever recommended sprinklers or anything like that.
And I guess I have a question. If we put a requirement like Commissioner Cause is suggesting on event centers, we have a lot of large, like churches. Many churches don't have sprinkler systems. Would that same requirement then be applicable and have to be posted in the churches as well?
If you chose to apply it to them, that the road could be traveled down. We'd see if there's any resistance to it. I think the issue is in the case of commercial buildings, and Mr. Armstrong has a good point, the person owning that building is inviting the public. and they're inviting the public for a reason, and that's, although it may be agritourism, it's essentially a commercial purpose. In that case, because they're inviting the public in, they can be put up to a higher standard. As far as places of worship, they do, although there's no established church in the United States, they do have special status that's recognized as, that's not, they're being invited but not for a commercial purpose. So if you wished to require places of worship to have that posting, you could look into that, but I think there's a differentiation between an event barn that is patently for commercial purposes and a place of worship that's really for,
So we could cut out that one specific.
you could make it applicable to the specific areas you felt was necessary.
But, you know, I think a lot of the things is that the standard of what the standard is has changed. Like 50 years ago, sprinklers were not.
No, they.
And you have a lot of large buildings that were. So if we move forward and we make the requirements from now on, whatever you build, that it's easier to transition over time.
Right, into that area.
How many water districts could actually provide water flow for sprinkler systems at a commercial level and meet the ISO rating?
Well, you'd have to do what the chief said: get your tank and have a pump, and it's more expensive.
It costs more than
the building.
Okay. But then what do you do when the tank runs out? You still got to have a water supply to it.
Well, hopefully that buys you time to get the fire truck down there.
Oh, I see.
Then you got
And it's
150,
volunteer.
200 gallons on there.
Yeah.
There's no perfect solution, but
there's
I know.
not.
Well, that's what I'm getting
why-
at. That's a rough solution to make everybody follow.
but this would get us at least closer to where we want to be.
Sure. Yep. Alrighty.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
So, let's drop churches and let's drop agriculture.
And
they
posting.
both have their own set of rules. So.
Yeah, well, they do. But, I mean, agritourism is a little different deal when somebody rents out an event center for an agritourism event.
And there's
That
no
may be a
posting
little-
requirement in this resolution, so that
Right.
Could be addressed separately if you decided to.
I don't know. I think all of us have probably walked into some older buildings here in town and
Yeah.
didn't read a bunch of signs and everything and still went in.
and you're talking about new construction, so you're just talking about what's happening in the
New
future.
construction, no inspection, agriculture, like I said, I think, their agritourism needs to be, a little different. If it's an event barn and it falls under agritourism, or can it be?
Mr. Chairman, given the state official policy of supporting agriculture and given the long line of statutes and court cases, I would suggest that we not even reference.
Go down there? Okay.
Don't go there.
That's it.
Just
All right.
don't go there.
That's fine with me. That's fine, but like I said, agriculture, just want to make sure agriculture's not under this.
Commissioner Culbertson's been pretty quiet. I'm going to guess he's had the most phone calls and emails.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for the discussion.
On the motion or in the public hearing?
I'm going to wait until after the public hearing.
Oh, okay. All right. Everybody got a pop-off valve.
Mr. Cos has had plenty of phone calls as well.
Yeah, I think we've all. Okay, is there anyone else that wants to speak in the public hearing on building codes? Going once, Mr. Herring? And I'll close the public hearing on the building codes. We're in regular session again. Now, you have some discussion.
So before I say this, I just want to say that I haven't seen any of you do anything you didn't truly think was in the best interest of your constituents. So I know your intent is good. I understand you're pushing building codes to try and protect buyers from buying a substandard built home. And you think you're helping people on insurance claims by forcing insurance companies to pay to repair homes to code. But the way it is right now, if a buyer wants to know if a home is built to code, they can get it inspected. It's an option to anyone. And VA and FHA loans require inspections anyway for a loan. to see if the home was built to code. And all the insurance companies that I talked to said this will cost homeowners more money in 3 ways. About a quarter of the residents in our county do not have law of ordinance coverage in their homeowners policy. This means if we pass this building code and they have a loss like a fire or tornado, the insurance company will not pay to repair the home to code, only to previous condition. So possibly, instead of just replacing a couple electrical outlets in the room that had the actual damage, the entire electrical system will have to be brought up to code. This could cost thousands of dollars out of the homeowner's pocket because they don't have that kind of coverage on their policy. Or everyone that doesn't have that law of ordinance coverage on their policy needs to pay extra to get that coverage. Or the third way is everyone's insurance premiums will probably increase once the insurance companies calculate the difference that it costs them between insuring homes in a building code community versus a non-building community. This dollar amount is hard to figure exactly what it will be, but every insurance company I talked to told me that's how it works. They
Can you
know
repeat that last part? What was that last part?
the dollar amount
Yeah.
is hard to figure exactly what that will be, but every insurance company I talked to told me that's how it works. They know it costs more to repair a home to building code than simply previous condition in any older home. So they prorate the extra cost among all their customers, not just the older home customers that don't have the coverage, even ones that live in newer houses built to code, because they prorate their losses among every customer. Another reason brought up for building codes was to make a burning house safer for firemen to put the fire out. An incident was brought up about an interior floor collapsing sooner than it would have, supposedly, if the home would have been built to code. The code pushes for I-truss floor joists to be used more than a solid 2x10 for floor joists. The fire rating on a particle board I-truss is much lower than a solid 2x10. So a floor built to code with I-truss floor joists will collapse a lot faster than one built with solid 2x10s. I don't know if any of you have ever cleaned up a house debris from a burnt house. The solid 2x10s is what's left that you have to clean up. The I-truss particle board floor joists are gone. They're not even there. I thought our goal as Republicans was for less government oversight, not more. Even if you're not hiring inspectors and personnel to enforce the new building codes today, it's just a matter of time before you want to add them, which will cost the taxpayers more money. If you insist on passing building codes for all the right reasons, I would like to ask you at least exclude barn homes and tiny homes from the ordinance. We've worked so hard to be new construction friendly the last couple of years. I think this would be taking a step backwards, because we know that the key to lowering taxes in this county to offset all the tax exempt property we are blessed with is new construction. Last year we approved about 20 barn home permits that would not be permitted if you pass this. The way they were constructed would not pass code. The argument can be made that you can build a barn home that meets code. The reality is, by the time you completely modify the construction in a typical style barn home to meet code, the cost will be so excessive you may as well have built a regular stick-built house. People live in the county for a lot of reasons. You're taking away one of the biggest ones. The majority of my constituents do not want building codes, and I'll go as far to say it's not one of my constituents wants building codes. So we had the questionnaire on the comprehensive plan that said about 50% of the people that were questioned wanted building codes. I guarantee you most of those are in the south end of the county. I already looked in to see if Kickapoo...
So not one of your constituents? You don't think there's one person in that whole part that wants...
I'm telling you, not one person has told me they want building codes from my district. Not one. The 50% that said they want it must all be in the south end of the county. I already looked in to see if Kickapoo and Easton could exempt themselves through home rule or something, but they can't. So I would at least ask you, if you pass this, could you exempt barn homes from the ordinance resolution?
Okay.
So, Chris, I had asked that question about the barn homes, and Jeff, you brought up the tiny homes. So, again, like you mentioned, you can order a pre-manufactured home that obviously comes at or above any standard that we might recommend. Why specifically would those? Can we get some more detail, or maybe that's a discussion at a later time to figure out exactly what those differentials are? I mean, when we say that the 20 that applied weren't built to a standard. Again, we don't check the standard. They don't submit plans. We have no idea what standard they were built at. We probably know there's some fundamental differences, but I hate making assumptions because it makes something out of most of us that do it. So I'd like to know specifically why those would be excluded. I mean,
Well, I don't think they would specifically be excluded unless they couldn't be built to code. I think if you grant a variance to your code before you even adopt the code, you are just encouraging people then to build that style of home so they don't have to meet code. The tiny homes aren't allowed right now, first of all.
Right, but
our current code does not allow tiny homes.
Right.
The new code would actually come closer to allowing a tiny home if it could meet code. Our current code say it's got to be 600 square feet or more, you can't build it. So that's a...
I just mentioned that because we're trying to get something going on tiny homes, and this would be another step backwards on that.
The barn homes, well, I would think that the tiny homes you would actually want to meet a more stringent code because you don't have a lot of room to be in there. So the barn homes, again, they can be built as long as they can be built to code. And I think the reason for the code is the important thing here, not that we're discouraging construction, but we're encouraging construction that meets code for safety issues. Will that add to the cost? I don't know. I haven't built a barn home, and your question...
Okay, well, I can tell you from being very familiar with barn home construction and being very familiar with those codes, but by the time you build a barn house to meet those codes, you might as well spend the money on a regular house.
But then what the flip side of that is that you're building something intentionally not to code, because to bring it to code would cost too much. The codes are there for safety reasons. So you're saying we're encouraging you to build a home that's not as safe so that you can save a few dollars or a few $1,000s or $10,000 or $20,000. I think to exempt a specific style of construction from meeting code would just encourage more of that kind of construction that's not code related. And what's the purpose of the code to begin with?
Somewhat, but there's a lot of energy regulations in those codes too. It's not even about safety. So there's a lot of different things that are in that code that a barn home won't meet.
Energy, as you go to the next level of codes, that's the energy seems to be the real big issues and the changes and mold mitigations. So how much on just say a barn home, you're purchasing engineered trusses most of the time. I mean, you can buy engineered trusses cheaper than you can build them.
Yeah.
So you're using like 6x6 poles for outside construction.
But for one example, those trusses are typically 5 foot on center to 10 foot on center. That won't pass code. So you're going to need trusses every 2 feet. So you just quadrupled your cost at the very minimum for your truss cost. I mean, there's almost no way to build a barn home to meet code that's not going to cost you the same amount as it would to build a regular house. And that was one of the biggest reasons a lot of people build barn homes, is because they can afford it to start out with.
You know, you're still going to have your electrical that's going to be up to code. You're not going to get an electrician come in and wire and put in inadequate electrical, and your HVAC's still going to be.
Yeah, and I don't see those costs as being the big difference.
So you're saying the big difference would be trusses?
The
trusses?
general, yeah, part of it would be the general construction itself, which truss is a big part of that.
And the frost footing.
Yeah, your snow load rating and your weight limits aren't going to pass code on probably not one of those barns that was built this last. I've been in 4 or 5 of them, and they wouldn't pass code. So I'm just assuming, which I know Chad said that's a bad idea, but sometimes you have to. So I was just hoping that you guys could exclude barn homes if you're going to pass this.
Go ahead,
Commissioner Cox. Yeah, I can fully support the exterior, like the trusses, the buildings. I mean, there's kind of a difference. There's not going to be firefighters climbing on top of a barn. I mean, if they know that it's made of metal and it's and they know that, but we need to make sure there's a mechanism for them realizing that it is a home know that they fight that fire differently because they are looking for people and can enter to look for people. But they should not be exempt from the wiring, HVAC, all of the mechanical, plumbing, all of those things, because that's a human safety issue.
Okay. So if I heard you correctly, that you don't have a problem with exempting barn homes for the structural. It's just that electrical and HVAC, plumbing, stuff like that.
Correct. And, just the materials that are used on the interior to make sure that,
Okay.
maintaining the greatest level of safety for the people who have chosen to live that life.
Is that a practical thing that could be written into the change to exempt structural from the other parts of it? If we did that for barn homes, that seems like we might.
Still,
I mean, has that ever? I'm wondering if that's feasible to be done.
I will be the first to admit I am not a builder. It's something I would need to go back to my committee and get pretty significant input on.
Commissioner Stephen, members of the commission, in response to your question, Commissioner Stephen, if you wish to exclude barn homes, I'm going to use the dreaded word. I would suggest then you direct staff to promulgate the language for that and table this motion, because I'm not going to be able to come up with a good definition for you right now. Okay. And because the way the law requires building code resolutions to be adopted, you cannot be general. It needs to be specific. Now, with that being said, I'd like to follow up something else. I'd earlier suggested a possible amendment to where the word residential is used in the resolution, put residential and, because it references certain residential and commercial.
Mm-hmm.
So that amendment I'm going to suggest should be considered by this board this morning. But again, if you wish to exclude barn homes, I would request that you give staff time to adequately provide you language that would be compatible with the intent of the law that allows you to adopt building codes. Mm-hmm. It needs to be pretty specific.
And I would be interested to know what that committee response would be to exempting barn homes, because I'm not saying that we should.
Now,
go ahead, Commissioner Cos.
I also think that it's very important to make a differentiation and distinction that if only, if you built a barn home where you combine your home with your business so that you have commercial operating out of that we need to look at how we handle that situation as well. For future construction.
I'm still trying to figure out, why can't we build tiny homes?
It's like the square footage.
The current code only requires residential to be over 600. Well, we do have
Our zoning and subdivision.
Zoning and subdivision.
And by definition, a tiny home is 400 square feet or smaller, so we don't allow.
So they're building those all across the country, just not allowing it in Leavenworth County.
We do have some.
We need to change that rule and we need to do something to add tiny homes.
And that's why I brought it up, because hopefully we're working toward allowing tiny homes in the near future, and so that's why I brought it up today. If you're going to pass this while we're at it, then if you could exempt barn homes and tiny homes.
That'd be to our zoning.
I think that Crystal actually looked into that pretty significantly because of some of the questions that came up, and that the current building code, I think it's 400 square feet in our current building code. That's the minimum. That's the smallest home that can be built is a total of 400 square feet. I think is right.
So our zoning regulations are 600 square feet, which is a pretty small home.
Right.
But the technical definition of a tiny home is 400 square feet or smaller.
In the International Building Code, you could potentially build a home that would meet code that was 400 square feet.
Yes. In fact, the 2018 code has an entire appendix, which you can adopt appendices separately. That's not a problem, but there is an entire section in the appendix on tiny homes in the 2018 code.
Or just put wheels on it.
Please.
Then you cannot live in it.
Please,
I guess we need to decide if we're going to exempt the barn homes or not. I personally think that if we exempt them, certainly from the whole code, and then we had a fire, I think it would be really tragic.
I mean, I'd love to see
I think a fire is tragic anyways.
The problem is you can't, and Jeff's made this point a few times, you can't really do it partial. I mean, at the end of the day, you'd love to say, look, commercially there's an expectation because the amount of people that you see and the risk associated with it. Because trusses, when you have hundreds of people in there, do matter. If somebody wants to do something for themselves or their family, I think the gentleman earlier mentioned that they're going to build something themselves. I couldn't stop you last week, I can't stop you next week, and I can't stop you next year. You're going to build something that I want to be able to make a recommendation, but at the end of the day, I don't like telling people what they can and can't do. I mean, that is an overreach. I think there should be recommendations and certain sets of understood standards. I think the chief made the mention of dealing with your kids. Well, there's morality at stake here too. There's a right and wrong, just in general, and unfortunately, I think that line's been blurred anymore. But I'd also like, again, on these barn homes, for example, and I'm passionate about them and want to see more of them happen. Is it truly just the truss count? Is it truly just the frost footings? And on a $100,000 build, $200,000 build, whatever that number is it a 3% increase in cost? Is it a 10% increase in cost? We talk about building permits used to be $7,000-8,000 now they're $3,000. Didn't stop anybody with that $5,000. I'm not suggesting this would stop anybody, but I don't know, and those are things that I think we should know. I want to see barn homes being built, and I want to see tiny homes being built. Doesn't sound like I'm solving either one of those.
I'm hoping the savings in the building permit goes toward the square footage of the house, and we tax it every year. Instead of just be used up on fees.
So could we pass this resolution and carve out a exemption where we would come back and revisit the issue of the
table it.
Commissioner, I would prefer to present you with a written resolution that would pass muster, and I think to do it piecemeal invites error. So if you wish to have your staff explore providing you with a definition that would effectively carve out an exception for barn homes, I'd ask time to do so. I'd also ask...
Go ahead, Commissioner Cos.
I'm sorry, this is Commissioner Cos. I would ask whether or not, if we move forward, that we could examine and have time to really look at what is the additional expense of a barn home were it to be brought up to what would be considered acceptable standards. And I think that we could gather that information rather quickly. And then if we need to make an amendment to the resolution at a later date, we could do that. But I want to know I want all the facts about how that would impact before I would really look at totally exempting barn homes, because I don't want them completely exempted. As I said, we have got to make sure that if it's a barn home, that's what it is, that there's not a business operating out of it as well, that if it's, a barn home, that there's mechanisms and that we need to make sure that we know they're there so that our emergency responders can appropriately respond. All those kinds of issues. And then, of course, the permits that have already been issued and the ones that have already been built, they're exempt.
I'd say the permits have already been issued, they wouldn't fall under this. You can't ask them to come back in and sign that they're going to build a code that didn't exist at the time they pulled the permit.
I agree with Commissioner Cos. I don't think I'm in favor of exempting barn homes right now, but if I learn more about it, I just don't know all the facts about it.
Well, it seems like there could be so we've had a lot of discussion around commercial, and it seems like there's far less concern for a standard single family, home. Mm-hmm. It's getting into these areas of atypical construction, which would be a barn home, which is a hybrid, or a tiny home that's clearly outside of current scope, but it should almost seem like those things could be easily separated enough mean, at the end of the day, someone that's building a barn home, they're, to Vicky's point, as long as there's not a business operating out of it that sees the public, you know, with the same thing we were talking about as far as not having inspections or enforcement, people are taking their life and their family's life at risk. And I say that with the understanding of, you know, it's not like we're seeing homes burning on a daily basis, so you got to keep everything in perspective. But we did see a tremendous amount of damage with the tornado, and you can bet that there's a lot of people that were, based on the feedback, we've got a lot of negative impact with not having a position on this. So. Like I said, I still don't know. You think about it. If the same tornado would have hit one of our larger cities and there'd have been far more home damage, I'm still saying the majority of those homes were outside of current codes. They were built at a 2012, a 2006, a 2002, or whenever. So that seems.
How long do you think it would take to get information on this barn situation?
About the additional cost?
Commissioner Steve and Dave M. Harris, I will work on the possible definition of a barn home, and I'll volunteer Ms. Voth to collect information on the possible increase in cost. They can be done at the same time, possibly realistically within 2 weeks, try to have adequate information.
I don't think 2 weeks is adequate.
I'd
I think
say
this is a
30
rabbit
days.
hole that probably doesn't have a bottom, to tell you the truth, because I don't think there's a definition of a barn home. I think what you call a barn home is different than what I would call a barn home, which is different than
There's a
what-
lot of homes that have metal roofs on them.
Exactly.
not
They're
barn
putting
homes.
metal roofs on new homes now all the time. So I'm very concerned that there is no clear definition on what a true barn home is, and there's different terminology that's out there, and trying to get the cost. I don't know who I would go to even, or who Crystal would go to even, to say how much would it cost to build a regular home versus a barn home versus if I had to build that same thing to code. I just don't know how you would even start to have that conversation.
Well, I think the bottom line is we want whatever home you build, barn home or tiny home or regular home, we want you to have an electrical system that's up to par where you're not going to have a danger of fire. We want you to have your basic minimum standards, which my understanding is almost all the contractors in Leavenworth County are following on new construction. And the reason this came up is because the insurance carriers were saying we don't want to build it up to standard because you have no code at all. So it seems to me that we're falling down the barn. I mean, whatever you build should have minimal, and that's all we're saying, minimal standards. And if it's a barn home, you should have a minimal standard too.
So in trying to balance the two, I guess my question is, how many more people are negatively impacted if there is a significant event like a tornado or just a traditional fire versus the number of people that potentially may not build because of the increased cost? I'm trying to figure out the largest population of people that are impacted both positively and negatively.
This is Commissioner Clark. I think there's probably a simple answer to that question.
So you weigh the options.
Fewer people impacted with the issue of barn homes than traditional residential homes.
The savings on the building permits was enough to bring everything up to code when it was built.
Crystal, how many barn homes did you say were built last year?
About 20, so it's roughly 20%.
And how many
We're at
total homes?
20%.
20 homes.
About 20 homes, and we built about 110 homes last year, so it's a little under 20%.
20% of the homes are.
It is important to note, though, that I don't have the exact number up right here in front of me, but a significant portion of that 20 were accessory dwelling units, so they were being built while people were building their traditional home. So
Okay.
a significant portion of them were not intended to be lived in permanently. Like I said, they're being built so that you can live on your property while you're building your home.
And maybe that's where you could carve out the exception.
Perhaps while I say that, I think it's also important to remember that once you have an accessory dwelling unit,
We have an accessory
somebody
dwelling.
is going to live in it.
Could live in
Could
it.
live in it.
And
could
it doesn't
live in
go
it.
away.
Right, it doesn't go away. We do also issue a significant number of accessory dwelling unit permits each year for people, who have elderly parents and such that people do live in.
And didn't we go away from our enforcement anyway so you could tell us, like, hey, I'm building this to live in it while I plan out my long-term residential home and then never build another structure?
Yes.
Right.
That would be what I would do.
Right.
It just seems like if, all we're talking about is new construction. It seems like if you were going to make a big impact over time, put the requirements on the new construction, and then as time moves on.
I like the barn homes myself.
And they have to just be built to the code.
So it wouldn't surprise me if it doesn't grow to
If you-
25% next year.
If you say you have to build barn homes to code, I'm telling you, you're not going to see very many barn homes because you can afford to build a regular stick-built house then.
Well, I mean, if it's between building a dangerous facility or having a
I
regular
don't think
house.
it's about dangerous.
Less safe.
These 20
less
barn homes are
dangerous,
not
more
dangerous.
It's all a matter of balance.
But Jeff, I'd argue, I've seen quite a few of them, and they're substantial. They're not doing it because they can't afford a residential home. They're doing it because it provides far greater flexibility. So they'd never think about building it without frost footings. They'd never think about building it without it being structurally.
Some are.
Oh, I would, because I put floor heat in it.
There you go.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I shared a property listing with the appraiser earlier this week, or into last week probably. That's a barn home that's listed on the market, and this is the second one I've shared with him. This one is listed at like $420,000, and I don't think you could argue that the intent of that was to save money when they constructed it. It's beautiful on the inside, but it looks like a Morton building with sliding doors at the end. When you look at it from the outside, on the inside it's a home. There was one probably a year ago that was also out there that was $650,000. So that's, to your point, is it's a barn home because of the flexibility it allows, not because it costs less to construct. There are some, obviously, that it's less to construct. So,
But I don't know how you define the definition of a barn.
and that's
There's so many people putting metal roofs on.
And that's my problem. And then, how do we define it, and how do we keep or prevent people from saying, "Well, this is a barn home"? So therefore, I don't have to worry about codes, even though really it's just a traditionally built home with a big garage on it. I mean, I don't know, and that's where I think it's a rabbit hole that makes it awful tough on staff to even define. And I'm a little concerned about exempting that when it's up to us to define what it is and trying to get some other numbers together. It's going to be longer than 2 weeks, I
But
guess.
again, asking the question of if there were 5 or 10 less of those types of homes built. Sorry, Vicki. If there are 5 or 10 less of those homes built versus, how many structural fires are there or force majeure incidents where people are being negatively impacted by a rebuild because we've taken no position. So I'm trying to figure out the balance between the two. To appease a few, to put potentially dozens or whatever that number is in a lesser leverage position if there was an incident. Like I said, hell, most of those homes aren't to code now. They'd rather probably not build it back to the 1955 standard it was built at. They'd rather, I take that back because most of those homes are built better than houses are built today.
If you look at the tornado, the older homes kind of survived.
Withstood, right. Back when a 2x6 was a real 2x6.
And 1x12s was instead of plywood on the ceiling.
Right.
Okay, so we either got to make a motion to pass this or table it because we have an 11 o'clock phone in on the work session on the.
Yes.
Could we have this tabled and you bring us back the exact wording of the motion with the possible alternative of excluding barn homes and tiny homes? And then we could decide from there with the actual language?
Commissioners, I think Mr. Lawfrey's words of warning probably are more likely to come true than not, but I can work on what I will call a workable definition of what a barn home is, and try to bring something back to you in the next, I think 2 weeks probably is too soon, but that possible amendment, and again, the other amendment that I discussed with you, and that's just purely semantic. If that's the board's desire, we can work on it, although I'm beginning to think perhaps Mark's correct.
I'm ready to move ahead with what we've got right here. I don't know how everybody else feels.
I'd like to table it, but not for that reason. Because we can't, there's some of those things we're not solving by passing it or not. I mean, the fact is, if tiny homes can't be built, it has nothing to do with this. It has to do with our planning and zoning regs then.
Or zoning regs.
Right. I'm not solving one with the other. So, I mean, I'd rather be able to solve more of those things. So we're promoting more development, even if there are some scenarios where we're putting more restrictions in place. I hate that word.
So how many days would it take to amend our zoning regulation to allow tiny homes?
So, not to get down a rabbit hole here by any stretch of the imagination, I think to amend our zoning and subdivision regulations would take about 60 days at this point, because we have missed the publication deadline, which we have to publish it and such. So we'd be looking at putting it on the December Planning Commission and then being before you approximately 3 weeks later. And of course, we run into the holidays and all of that. That being said, I'm happy to do that. If that's what the consensus of the board is, I will take it forward. Again, all that being said, our zoning and subdivision regulations need to be amended, to be updated. They are pretty old. That's one of the goals of the comprehensive plan, is that our zoning and subdivision regulations be fully amended. And that's something that I support. We kind of have been doing it piecemeal for the last decade or so. It causes issues. We've piecemealed so much of it together now that we do our best to make sure we're not, we don't have things that are in conflict with other things within the zoning regulations. But it's just like anything. The more times you try to update it and amend it, eventually you get to a point where it's just not working great. So.
And some of the stuff that's in there is because we don't have building codes, obviously.
Correct.
The 600 square feet thing is because we don't have building codes. That normally wouldn't be part of a subdivision guideline.
Yeah, that seems odd.
So,
Yeah.
So once we adopt the building codes, then that'll be a foundation for you to
then repeal some of those other items.
So it seems like we should move, at least get a resolution before us that has made the changes that you suggested.
I think you have that resolution. It just would say residential and commercial construction on that
You have
first
to amend the
whereas.
resolution.
Okay.
Quick, easy fix.
Yeah.
Well, I'm good with moving ahead.
Well, then, are you making a motion?
I make a motion with the changes suggested on residential and commercial as amended by Mr. Van Paris that we adopt the resolution
2020-39.
2020.
Yeah, what's the number? Yeah.
2020-39.
Yeah.
I still think there's just enough discussion to not rush. I mean, we're not into the building season. We're past the building season. So I think there's some additional discussion that can and should be had. If it was just commercial, that'd be a little easier, I think. But
So that's my motion. I don't know if anyone wants to second it.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the resolution 2020-39?
And it was the second by Commissioner Cox, for the record.
Okay, so on discussion, if it was up to you, you would want to table this until we get back, and then building season's pretty much over, just so we have something in place before the next building season, that we could, maybe something the first year.
well, I think there's enough still questions out there to get some comfort around before we wholesale make the change. So
Is that mainly because of the barn situation and the tiny homes, or are there other concerns?
yeah, I mean, I think there's already enough areas where we're not development friendly enough. And while I think this is trying to say we want development, we want to do so as intelligently as possible, right? But there's already things we're doing now that is not intelligent. So I'd like to see some of that resolved. So I'm of the opinion I'd rather table it for the time being.
Okay. So if this motion fails, you would make a motion to that? Okay. Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion before a call for vote?
I just think, in response to that, I think we have a very minimal standard here. It's not anything that's, it's for new construction. It's only if 51% is a remodel or destruction of your property. I think we're addressing something that needs to be addressed, and I think it's been discussed. I'm not sure if I thought that there was a way to exempt these tiny homes I don't have enough information as far as why we would exempt a barn home from electrical requirements or a barn home from those. I think we want all those built up to standard. So I just think as a minimal standard, we're the 6th largest county in the state. This is a very, very small step.
This is Commissioner Cos. I would tend to agree with Commissioner Stephen insofar as exempting any property and not require the basic codes of HVAC, electrical, all of those things. That's a big concern that I have.
Okay. And I don't think what Commissioner Shemke was talking about was that part of it. I don't believe.
Correct.
I don't mean to speak for you.
No.
But there was just other issues that he wanted to look into prior to passing.
Right. This is Commissioner Cox. I understand that, but if we exempt, if we exempt barn homes, we exempt them.
Yeah, and I don't think that was all Commissioner Shemke had concerns over. So
we don't have them today. I'm not. I'd rather not rush when there's still some questions out there I think we can get some clarity on, and this is in several weeks, not several months. We're already building apparently $500,000 barn homes, so I don't think it's as much of a concern as we might believe it to be. But if there's some other things that can be solved at the same time, and it sounds like that's outside of the building codes and maybe more of the planning and zoning regs.
Okay.
So if you
go ahead,
This is Commissioner Cox. I'm just going to check with council. Can I withdraw my second in lieu of another motion to table for further discussion?
Okay.
I'll withdraw my motion and make the motion to table for further discussion and come back in 3 weeks.
Commissioner Stephen has solved the problem.
Okay, I have another motion, a motion to table this matter with 3 weeks, or would it be 30 days? Would it be better to have 30 days?
Well, it has to be a date certain that we actually have a meeting on.
Okay.
So
4 weeks or 3 weeks? Will 3 weeks be enough time, do you think, to get your questions answered?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. We'll have a motion.
It's not enough not to go down the planning and zoning other than having further discussion, no. So I'm not expecting that in 3 weeks. Just
So
we can
either-
get a few of these other questions answered.
November 11th, or it was 3
We'll see.
weeks.
November 11th
8th.
is Veterans
With the Veterans Day, we're going to have to
Veterans
do, we'll have to change our meeting that week.
So then
The
maybe
18th?
November 18th.
18th to the 18th. Is that okay with you, Commissioner Cos, to the 18th?
That works for me.
Okay.
All
Sorry,
right.
you need to.
Have a motion. Do I have a second? Yeah. I have a motion and a second to table till the November 18th. Any further discussion? Voting. Aye.
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 Nay.
Commissioner Cox, aye.
All right. Is there any further business before we adjourn to?
I would just ask one thing, that in the next week or two, you get those questions
Yes.
Yeah.
very specifically via email to Crystal, so that we know exactly what it is we're trying to solve for.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Then, all right, then I'll have entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. Voting.
Aye.
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 Crystal, I do want to thank you.
Thank you.